attendees to join in. Okay, hello. I think I'll just begin while the attendees join in. Firstly, welcome to everyone for the Includovate Thought Series. For everyone who's new to Includovate Thought Series, this is a webinar series of about 6 episodes where we speak to our staff and talk about their experiences, their thoughts around things that we care the most about, social inclusion, youth inclusion, and several other topics. Again, for those this is an internal plus external kind of a webinar. So several people from within Includovate and outside of Includovate would be joining in. For those who are outside of Includovate, I'll give you a very brief introduction about what we do. Includovate is a research incubator, and we work around ensuring that several things like social inclusion, disability inclusion, inclusive governance are taken care of through research and rigorous quality research. We are headquartered in Ethiopia and Australia and are 100% female owned. We walk the talk and we pride ourselves in doing that by a small representation could be, we have about more than 70% staff based out of sub-Saharan Africa. We have more than 60% staff who is female, and we genuinely, truly believe in shifting the power balance from the global north to the global south. We are very happy to be hosting our first thought series, and we've already had 2 episodes completed where the first one was focusing on social inclusive governance mechanisms, and the second one was on social inclusion. One aspect that was not covered in both of these and often is not covered in the global policy landscape is youth and youth inclusion. So this is what we would be talking about today, and we will be touching about several topics, right from what is youth inclusion in all honesty. And before we go in depth into what we hear about it and what our insights are, I will introduce myself, introduce everyone else. A quick note to the attendees, you're already on mute and your videos are off so that we can have no distractions while this conversation goes on. Though we would invite all of you to kind of send in your question answers through the Q&A button that you have access to, or just drop by on chat and introduce yourself so that every other attendee is also aware of who's attending. So that's pretty much it. And I am Kanika Joshi. I'm from India, based out of Chicago right now, and I would be your host for this session. I'm very happy I have been a researcher. I currently work as head of programs and communications at Includovate. And I'm really looking forward to hosting 3 really amazing researchers that we have. And I will open the floor for Hannah to quickly introduce herself, then Bikila, then Racha, and then we could basically just kickstart the session. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Kanika. So yeah, I also work at Includovate. My name is Hannah Lama, and I've been working at Includovate at the capacity of feminist researcher for over a year now, and I would be discussing youth inclusion and feminist lens in youth inclusion today. So thank you, Kanika.
Bikila.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Bikila Hirpa. I'm working as an analyst in Includovate. And now I'm going to discuss about the importance of youth inclusion in the context of Ethiopia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kanika. I am Rasha Amati. I'm an international gender equality consultant working with Includovate as a senior researcher on gender studies. And today I'm going to be speaking with all of you about youth inclusion and gender equality and my role as a UN Women Youth Advisor for the Arab States region. Thank you.
Thank you all. So now I will just deep dive into what we have prepared. We just, as a heads up, we have a session, some quick insights that we have prepared for everyone's um, help, and then we will open the round for Q&A session, live Q&A as well, if we have the time. So this is the Includovate Thought series. Welcome to it. And why do we really care about youth inclusion? We have about half or more than half of the population, which is youth right now, but only 6% of them participate in politics. These are from the UN statistics. We have still about 100 million young people who are illiterate, who do not get access to education, which is a determinant for jobs and employment, not the entire determinant, but one of it. About 13% of young people are unemployed, which is the unemployment rate, which is 3 times more than the adult unemployment rate. So we know that young people face more barriers in several aspects of their life. Now, before I talk about insights and before the panelists kind of touch about like insights on youth inclusion, from my experience as a young person and my experience as a young person who's working in the youth and SDGs landscape with UNSDS and Youth as a senior advisor, and in my several other organizations and within Includovate, I keep hearing about several narratives, and all of these narratives are really like looped in together. And that's why I just had like them showcased on this slide. At conferences, we keep hearing nothing about us without us. That's exactly why we want young people to kind of join in. Then we hear about young people's commitments on how they're part and keen on being a part of a better future and shaping the better future. We also kept hearing at universities that we're the young generation which has highest years of education, highest mobility, highest access to internet. And we keep also seeing in popular media that young people are now tired of being the topic and not the leaders. Like young people's perspective and development has been limited somehow to tokenization, and we want to move away from that. As per statistics, we know that global youth population is to swell up to 1.8 billion. And despite of all of this, and despite of all the promises, we know that there are several people, young people in developing countries subjected to extreme poverty, discrimination, abuse, low representation, unemployment, and face several other forms of oppression. So that kind of brings us to several challenges that young people face. Some of them that are usually on the top of our head could be definitions, like how the young people's definition is not the same, and how with each country, with each context, with each project, it changes. How segmentation is something that is not really talked about several times. So by segmentation, we mean several people within country context. I could give my example from India, have a lot of privilege, probably because of the structural barriers or the privileges that they have. So while I got access to good quality education, several other people in India, because of their caste and class background, could not avail that. And that's why youth is not one segment, and that's often missed about in several conversations. Access to capital is also a big element, where we know that young people find it like very difficult. Only 6% of youth have actually accessed formal finance. So these are again UN statistics, and it's a very low number, because we know that finance is important to better livelihoods and several other elements of life. And there are several gender nuances, how females or people from the LGBTQI community actually face more barriers to inclusion. And this is exactly why I want to now hand over to Hannah, probably, to discuss about the feminist approach to youth inclusion and hear her insights. Over to you.
Thank you, Kanika. I'm going to be sharing my screen for this presentation. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, great. So Kanika has touched upon youth inclusion and the different aspects of youth inclusion, but I want to start from a larger perspective of social inclusion of young people and a feminist approach that we can employ to ensure a more diverse youth inclusion. So first, I'd like to define what social inclusion is and where youth inclusion comes in. And social inclusion is the process of providing the platform, the opportunity, or the resources to groups or people that are on the brink of being excluded from society because of their identity. And this social inclusion ensures that these people have the chance to be integrated in the socioeconomic life of their own community. And that's why I think it's very important to start the conversation there. And among the identities that result in the exclusion of a certain group of people, being young is one factor that we should always start from. And young people are faced with different barriers like the lack of access to resources, lack of access to knowledge and opportunities, and so many different barriers that stop them from actively contributing to the community that they belong in. And I think youth inclusion ensures that these barriers that are faced by young people are primarily addressed, and that's why we started here. But having said this, we come to a question that I'm sure all of you have asked yourself before you joined into this webinar, and that is, why is youth inclusion important? So when we talk about youth inclusion, in this presentation only, I will be focusing on the 4 major factors that make youth inclusion very valuable. And the first is that young people are the future. And when we say this, we say that because young people determine the future of a country and its socioeconomic development. And that's why it's very important to start the investment on them. And secondly, young people are endowed with the energy, the capacity to learn and contribute more fully to the society. And thirdly, investing in young people has intergenerational benefits because they would be creating another generation that they can impact and make sure that they become a powerful agents of change. And the final point that I want to raise when I talk about youth inclusion and its importance is that the exclusion of young people from social life can have detrimental impacts on the society, and the social economy can have a socioeconomic and political costs that range from unemployment to political unrest. So that's why we say that they need to be the focus of social economic inclusion. And now that we have said this and that we agree that youth inclusion is important, we need to talk about why we need to make sure that this youth inclusion, or the process of youth inclusion, needs to be inclusive of all groups and all identities. We need to talk about whether or not marginalized groups, vulnerable groups, and women, people living with disabilities, we need to make sure that those people are part of the conversation, that they are decision makers, and that they are brought to the table for a dialogue. And we also need to talk about how we need to address the intersectionality of being young and a woman. And these questions are why we need a feminist approach to youth inclusion. Having said that, I think a couple of points that we need to talk about when we discuss a feminist approach to youth inclusion is that employing a feminist approach to youth inclusion, it requires us to integrate a gender analysis of every provision and every need that a country has. And having this gender analysis can help us make an evidence-based or balanced policy plan, activity, and so many documents that determine the future of a nation. And we can make sure that we're seeing these documents through a gender lens, which can have an impact in our future. These plans and policies should also focus on young people and women's and disabled groups and marginalized groups and their access to different services. And young people should also be part of the development dialogue. We need to include them in the narrative of the socio-economic life. And with regards to gender equality, education, agriculture, food security, all these topics need to be seen with a gender lens. And we say a feminist approach means critically evaluating the intersectional disadvantages that are faced by young people due to their identities, like their gender, their economic status, their ethnicity, their religion, their disability. All these things matter in how they stand in the social strata and how they're included. So we need to focus on these things and work to address that these issues, these intersectional disadvantages are addressed for young people to be fully included. Yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Kanika.
Thank you for that presentation. And I think two things that definitely stand out in several of the important things that you've touched upon is how investing in youth has intergenerational elements, and it's often not really emphasized on enough, and how there are intersectional disadvantages that that women or people, because of their identity, could face. And we completely overlook that in several of the projects that happen in the development sector, and how that really needs to change. It's important to also understand, like where we're touching about intersectionality, on how country contexts are probably relevant. And that's exactly where I would like to now invite Bikila in to talk about the Ethiopian youth inclusion narrative and what exactly happens there, and any other insights that he has based on his experience. Over to you, Bikila. Thanks. Thanks, Bikila. We can see you, but we cannot hear you. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
So,
Please
okay,
proceed.
sorry. I'll start to define the user inclusion, and then try to highlight some important points on the status of user inclusion in Ethiopian context. So the first, but we need to define user inclusion. The Howard defined user inclusion as the inclusion of young people, all the engagement, active engagement of the young people in all development process. By this, it means that it's not when narrowly defined as delivery of these basic services for people by the government, but the broad definition of this youth inclusion is more about empowerment, it's more about creation of an enabling environment, and it's all about integrating the youth in all development process. The second point would be why it's the rationale for youth inclusion in Ethiopia, because in Ethiopia, they account the lion's share, significant share of Ethiopian population, around 29%. They are also an active workforces, so that they can contribute to the development of a nation. So the third point is inclusion of youth will enable us to define or to design an effective policies or programs that need to get better outcomes. And the last one is, like, it has also a strong correlation with the poverty and school enrollment. So it's important to include the youth in all aspects of development. So the next will be, like, what is a figure? What the current status of youth inclusion in Ethiopia? So when we see this, we can first see the in terms of the global youth development index. the status of Ethiopia with respect to other countries. This is a the report for 2016, where Ethiopia stood 131 among the 183 countries. So this is the index that measures the extent to which youth are included in the development by using the 5 indicators you can see here. So the education, health, employment, civic participation, and also political participation. So when we see this, we have done a little bit better in terms of political participation. As you can see, we stood 39 among the 183 countries. So we can also see in terms of gender-based violence, where 30% of young women faces any form of gender-based violences, and where 6% of them are found in rural areas, out of which 50% do not report any form of violence to the legal authorities. So we can also see the child marriage, which is almost nearly 40% according to 2018 reports. So this is also one of the indicators that shows the extent to which youth inclusive status in Ethiopia looks like. The other is the prevalence of HIV/AIDS as one indicator of health. So you can see 0.4% of male youth and female 0.5 are exposed to this disease. So this is the figure which shows, or the indicators or parameters that shows the extent of youth inclusion in Ethiopia. So given these all problems, the country Ethiopia has tried to resolve this problem using the policies and packages. The first one is the Vanguard Proclamation policy, the National Youth Policy, and Youth Development Package. These policies try to attempt those problems using different approaches and try to bring some outcome in terms of especially increasing employment opportunities for users and involving them to take part in development process, though they have their own problems that we will discuss later. So the next one is like, what are the barriers? We have seen the figures, we have seen the policies that attempt to resolve the problem that's prevalent in the area of youth inclusion. So what are the barriers? So we'll see the barrier. The first one is lack of employment opportunity, which means like there's low job creation by the government of Ethiopia. The credit schemes are not all accessible for all. I mean, they are basically all of the users who want to work do not get access to this credit scheme. The second one is low access to land. In Ethiopia, there are two forms, basically two major forms of getting land for use. The first is through rental, and the second is through inheritance. And this one, inheritance, especially excludes the women, because according to majority of Ethiopian culture, the youth, I mean, the young girls do not have the right to inherit land from their parents. So this is one of the barriers for more inclusive development of the youth. So the third one is the socioeconomic and political problems. This indicates like the government is less, low political commitment to change the aspects of, the problem of youth. And the last one is a more very restrictive gender norms, which holds women behind, especially for women's, young women's, gender-based violences, especially the child marriage. I just picked this one because it has, it affects the education aspect and prohibits women not to utilize their potential. So out of these all problems, of these four problems, who are the most vulnerable groups among the youth? These are the first is the young woman, the young women, then the young women, or I mean, young people living in drought areas, and those refugees or the internally displaced persons. So, so given all these problems, I've tried to collect some recommendations, the way forward, how to change this all, and try to summarize in these two broad categories. The first is to revisit the policy itself, the national youth policy, because the policy itself, the national youth policy, is not less technocratic, not driven by, it's not demand driven, or it is basically politically motivated. I mean, it's not for the purpose of resolving the problem of youth to some extent. So when we see the three policies, they do lack these elements. Less technocratic, not demand driven, and more or less politically motivated. So the second one is like to change or modify the gender norms and beliefs that prohibits youth to share the benefit of the country's development. The major one is child marriage and so the inheritance law. So this is all about youth inclusion, the nature of youth inclusion in Ethiopia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bekela. I will let you stop sharing your screen. And before I invite Raja, I think you've touched upon some very insightful topics, at least from the country context. And I think, again, things that definitely stand out are how youth policies and like youth inclusion in itself is not an isolated topic, right? How it has strong correlations with school enrollment, poverty, and we need to actually work on the entire landscape to kind of steer things or move the needle towards inclusion. Also, another aspect I think you touched upon, which is often neglected, is the youth refugees and like youth migrants. It is very well known that migrants who are young people face exploitative work conditions. They face more barriers to life than others in general, and it's something that needs to be worked upon. We also, as Includovate, have had two projects, I think one with Save the Children and Ravenstone Consultancy, where we were actually trying to understand the youth migration trends and why, like how troublesome is it for young migrants who go out from Ethiopia or come back to Ethiopia, or are returnee migrants to pursue their life and their work. And also another project that we worked on is the youth strategy with IRI, where we were trying to see what are, like in agriculture, how is that young farmers face a lot of stress, and like what can be done to ensure that agriculture or like youth farmers actually have a better say in the decision making. So with these, thank you, Hannah, for touching upon the feminist approach to youth inclusion, and thanks, Bekela, for touching on the country context, also giving us a good overview of the policies. Now, I think it will be very interesting for us to hear what is happening, like what are UN bodies doing, or what are other young people doing to ensure that some of these barriers are overcome. So on this, I would like to let the stage open for Raja to kind of touch upon these things and her experience working on the same. Thanks.
Thank you, Kanika. I'm going to share my screen quickly. So I'm going to be speaking today about youth and gender equality and my role as a UN Women Youth Advisor for the Arab States region. I am a part of a platform that is called Youth Gender Innovation Agora, which was created in 2018 as a platform and consultative forum to have regular dialogue with youth people. This platform is formed from a variety of people, social professionals, young activists, influencers that promote and support this initiative. And us, me and my other colleagues, we are 47 people that we were selected for the term 2021 to provide expertise around youth and gender equality in the region, and also disseminate information around networks and different organizations, specifically in the region. And my role as an advisor, what we do, me and my colleagues, is to provide strategic perspective on advocacy issues and UN Women's thematic priorities that later on I will touch and mention the priorities for this year. And we also assist in strengthening UN Women's engagement with civil society, including formal and informal groups and initiatives at all levels. And among other things that we do, we also design campaigns, initiatives, and provide innovative methodologies to promote gender equality in the region, focusing especially on topics as women, peace, and security, especially for the countries in the region that are in conflict, humanitarian action, and preventing violence extremism. We also focus on women's economic and political empowerment, the engagement of men and boys in promoting gender equality, ending violence against women and girls, the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, innovation and ICTs that promote gender equality. We also focus on promoting the participation and priorities of the voices of young people in national, regional, and global communities, assisting to different international conferences that they're going to take place this year to promote and share our voice about the priorities that we think are important to push the agenda for gender equality. We will also launch GIA initiatives, campaigns, and activities, and also try to hold governments accountable for their commitments around the gender action plans and gender equality in the region. After having a meeting recently this month with the UN Women Director, she mentioned for us to do the annual plan for 2021. The priorities for us to achieve the goals will be according to these 5 areas, which are economic empowerment of women, increasing the number of women in the workforce, trying to decrease the violence against girls and women in the region, women, peace, and security, having as a framework the UN Security Council 1325 platform, and also trying to ensure that women are participating in peace negotiation processes. And the last one would be women's participation in decision-making bodies. All this considering the international frameworks that UN Women works with, as the Beijing Platform for Action, the CEDAW Convention, which is the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against All Women and Girls. And these are all of us, the youth advisors that we were selected for the term 2021. And we will try our best to push the agenda and try to make an impact, especially now that we are going through a global pandemic, where these issues are really important, and we will try to make a change. Thank you very much. This was all.
Thank you, Raja. I think that's really helpful for us to at least hear what's happening on ground and what's happening with organizations and on the advocacy front. One thing I think is very clear is that now young people, and at least all the batchmates that you showed the pictures of, are demanding meaningful engagement and participation, because we have often seen that young people are not part of the decision making. And now I think I would open the floor for even attendees to ask questions and answers. We have a small question answer round session now. I also have some questions that I would definitely want to ask you all, and feel free to jump in, whoever thinks that they want to address it. But otherwise, attendees, feel free to ask questions either on using the Q&A button or on chat. Thank you. I think there's already a question. So let me just start with that one. So Abhyut says that the youth are often seen as agents of positive change, as hope, as future. And on the other hand, they are negatively portrayed as destabilizing force and feared, which is, politically speaking, we keep hearing that quite a lot, like in sub-Saharan Africa. Any further reflection on that? Anyone who wants to volunteer to speak on it? Rasha, Hannah, Bikila, open to you guys. Hannah, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think in Sub-Saharan Africa and other countries in different continents as well, I think the youth are seen as both the evil and the good. But I think the youth are capable of portraying or reflecting what they've been fed, because it's a very active age and they learn from their seniors, and it depends on who taught them and what were they taught when they were younger. So I don't think we can blame the youth on how they act or whether it's good or evil. So I think it's better to improve the way or the system that we're teaching young people and the opportunities that we provide them. And I think the fault would be on people that are educating young people and not young people themselves.
Thank you. That's definitely an important discussion and insight. Rasha, just again touching upon another comment from the attendees, want to know, like, you do some interesting work around youth inclusion, and what if someone wants to support? Are there means, mechanisms where you think people can support? Any website they can head to? Over to you to address that.
A space to reach out for me or them to do it on their own to support this initiative? That's what you mean? Well,
right.
there's, for example, a lot of initiatives going on. I would say to see the Gender Equality Forum that it's going on this year, which is a platform that tries to push the agenda for gender equality, and it's formed from a broad perspective of different youth activists. And you can be a member, attend the meetings, and also have a lot of information on the websites. You can go to UN Women and see the websites and see the initiative that they do like this. You can familiarize yourself with the initiative and try to be a part from it, to try to make an impact too.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Bikila, next questions for you. Who should be the pushing force? You touched upon several insights from Ethiopia, and an attendee wants to know, Dennis, who should be the pushing force? Should it be the state or the civil society? And how should the separation of responsibilities take place in youth inclusion? I think one more element of the question is, was national packages and policies, were they included in the CSOs that you discussed? Happy to, over to you to answer that. Bikila, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so to respond to the first question, I think that it's a responsibility of the government, because in Ethiopian context, it's very difficult to establish a youth association or volunteer group or social a kind of civil societies, and in an attempt to change something or bargain some interest around the benefit of the youth. So everything that needs to change or make any change belongs to the government. So if the government have the commitment to do this, so they can also mobilize youth in different programs or in different associations. For example, if we see practically in Ethiopia, there are a lot of youth organizations, associations, and also their federations. But these are basically the political appointees, or they have nothing to do with the interest of the youth. They usually serve some interest group, or like some perhaps the government. So the interest, the commitment basically emanates from the government more than the civil society, because the civil societies couldn't operate by themselves if they have if there is no commitment with the government. This is the point, I think.
Thank you, Bikila. I think that very well answers that question. And I think now more than ever, young people are definitely challenging status quo, even turning out to unconventional means of media like social media to actually protest against the status quo and talk about structural barriers and like get youth inclusion if they're not basically create that space if they're not getting that space. And another question, I think, on the demand side challenges by Gidisa that has come up is on top of the demand side challenges to youth unemployment, what are the supply side constraints that come so that to come up with both sides inclusive system? So basically, like, what is the way forward, right? And I think this is an interesting question, a very valid question, and I would like all three of you to kind of address it. What if you could tell us three things, like top three things which are important to achieve youth inclusion? Hannah, you could go first, then Bikila, Raja. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So in my opinion, the first thing that we need to look at is that how are young people being given an opportunity, or how are they being served? Are they, do they have the services to educate themselves? And we need to focus on giving them the opportunity to learn and developing their capacity. So I think that's one thing. And another thing would be bringing them to the conversation table, to the dialogues of community development and socio-economic development, and making sure that they are part of the solution and not just the problem. So that would be another thing. Maybe a third thing that I can come up with is that improving the infrastructure to services that they have, and making sure that they can communicate well with people in power. Like Bikila said before, they need to be able to connect or to, like, pass on their comments or their feedback or their complaints to the government offices, and they need to be heard. So I think these three things are most important in ensuring that youth are, included in the they're included in the society. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I want to repeat my previous slide. Like, the first is to revisit the policy itself, the use policy, because the use policy, if you see the use policy itself, the interest of the use, the approach they use to state the definition of use itself is ambiguous, because they use the edge set definition approach to define policies. They see use, they do not take into account the heterogeneity among the use of the same age category. So the policy itself, from its approach, from its structure, or from its the very framework that government interests to change the interest of the use is not clearly depicted in the policy. So first, we need to revisit or re-examine the policy itself. The next one, as a very basic one, is to change or work with the social norms, because very important points that exclude the youth, especially the women, from the development is in the social norms. Or so we need to change this by working or by increasing, doing on awareness or the likes. So the third one is to do some regulatory frameworks on, for example, inheritance law that I have discussed previously, just to do with this, to do an regulatory framework for this. So I think these three ways can improve the more inclusive of the use in the development. Thank you.
Well, I think for me, the most important things is their economic empowerment, and the government should try to facilitate for them to achieve better jobs with decent conditions, especially now that we are going through a crisis. Our generation is facing a lot of challenges, and governments, they should facilitate this, especially for youth, because we are the future of sustainable development. So it would be economic empowerment, their education and basic rights met. All of this, the government should implement it through a gender perspective, especially paying attention to girls and women. This would be my answer. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think we've gotten several things that could be done as a way forward, and we should definitely document them and walk the talk like we always do. It's interesting to see how young people and youth engagement is now being shattered as just a stereotype. And youth engagement is now actually something that will drive political participation. And instead of seeing youth inclusion as an end in itself, it's also a means to meet the sustainable development goals, like you rightly touched upon. And it's important to see where we go from here. And there are several. I don't see if there are any other questions from the attendees. Please feel free to ask. Otherwise, I think one final question from my end would be: there's great work happening. There's a lot more that needs to be done. What do you think? Who do you like? If you had to name one organization or one youth icon or one person who's doing quite a lot in the youth inclusion narrative and landscape, who would it be apart from Includovate? Over to you again in the same, I think, manner, Hannah, Bikila, then Racha. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. For me, it would be the last organization I worked at before I worked at Includovate, and that's ISEC. ISEC is, I'm not sure if most people in Ethiopia are familiar with it, but it's the biggest international youth-led organization. And I think it's the most experienced or the most advanced in youth empowerment and youth inclusion, because it gives power to young people, not only to be part of the activities and not only to be a team member, but also to be leaders and, you know, state actors. And I think that's very important for other organizations to also adopt. So yeah, it would be ISEC.
Bikila, do you want to go next?
No, just I want to pass.
Okay, Raja.
For me, it would be an organization based in Canada that I really like what they do and their work for youth. It's called Youth Services Jeunesse, and they provide services. They help youth people to access the markets. They facilitate the process for them, and they also try to reduce the rates of young offenders by providing, by making it less the rates of youth employment. So they provide for them employment and help them with a wide range of services. It's really, really helpful. That would be one organization I like.
Perfect. That's very helpful. And I think we need to, in the development sector, we all have the same aim, and it's really important to collaborate and actually celebrate the efforts of other organizations as well, rather than just our own. So thank you for bringing that to our notice. Also, there are, I think, 3 more questions, and then we could probably, if we have the time to address all, we could. Otherwise, we can address them at later. Just for those who had joined in late, this is a webinar series. It has 6 parts, and we have been touching about things that we care about deeply from our internal staff at Includovate. Every attendee who's not within Includovate, we're a research incubator working towards several things in the development sector. We do consultancy work, we do research work, and create several toolkits as well. We have been touching upon a lot of elements, among which we touched upon the feminist approach to youth inclusion, we touched upon country context in Ethiopia to youth inclusion, and the work that's happening by UN and the likes. We have also discussed the way forward, and now I will just again have one of these questions, which is by Donia, one of the attendees. So the question is, we are now observing social movements and uprisings where women, youth are still at the front line, such as in Sudan most recently. Yes, we all saw that coverage. To what extent do you think they have the potential to have an impact to change international development agendas towards greater gender equality and youth inclusion? Do you know if any such changes are happening already? Open to any of the panelists who wants to address that. Maybe Rasha, do you have any insights on it?
Yes, I'm just reading the question carefully to see what
Sure.
Donia is trying to say. Well, I think that these movements are really important because they are making the future generation heard. They should keep doing these movements. And I do think they can create an impact. At least they are starting to do something. And I think the more they do this, the more we will be able to have a more inclusive society with their voices making them be heard. So I think I do see these changes happening, and I see it's a good thing that they do these movements. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Hannah, probably you could address the next question by a Abiot, which says, how can we address youth inclusion, particularly by the rural female who are said to be facing triple challenges? She is rural, geographically isolated, young as a youth, and then she is woman, gender norms. How do you think we can address that barrier that young females in rural areas face?
Yeah, so I've tried to touch upon intersectionality in my presentation, but like you said, especially in Ethiopia, the problems that rural women face and the problems that city women or women living in the cities face are completely different. And that's by no means to say that the problems that women in the cities face are any lesser, but they're certainly different, and there's different dimensions to consider when it comes to the rural women. So I think the first thing that we need to do in order to address this triple challenges, this intersectional disadvantages faced by rural women, is engaging the community in conversations. So I'm not sure if I think Kanika mentioned this around the start of the webinar, where Includovate is trying to revise the National Ethiopian Women's Policy. And the first thing that we're noticing is that the public is really willing to engage in conversations with regards to gender equality, and the way we're going about it previously had not been right because we're not considering the culture, the traditions that the Ethiopian community has. But I think in the future, if we consider where they're coming from and without judgment, really listen to the places that they're expressing their thoughts and try to help them out in a different way, try to engage in conversations and dialogues with them, I think we can address different intersectional disadvantages that rural women have. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. I think we'll take one last question and also like a comment from Jessica, and then have a closing comments from all. It's basically on top of what all we have discussed. I think Jessica is curious to know if governments are alone that should be the drivers to youth inclusion in terms of impact, like having impact, and any organizations that are designing programs. I think one thing, this has already been discussed, but yeah, she also or he also discussed one organization, Yali, which does work in sub-Saharan Africa and prepares young people and leaders and entrepreneurs to prepare for their work. So probably just one question here to end with: are governments the only agents of change to drive youth inclusion? I think I will also quickly jump in there. No, I think everyone, right from sitting in the kitchen to our houses to governments and outside, need to ensure that structural barriers are kind of ending from all aspects of life. As Hannah also mentioned, there's intersectionality in this entire discourse around youth inclusion, and that needs to be that can only be overcome if we start right from ourselves and within ourselves. And I think that's why I'm happy to actually be hosting 100% youth-led panel as well today, because it's important that the people who are most affected by the conversation to be on such places as well. So I would just like probably invite thank all the attendees to join in such a short notice. We only had the webinar posted on our social media handles 2 days back. So glad to see the attendance and the interest from all. I will just let everyone have probably closing comments around youth inclusion, anything that you feel is a challenge, or anything that you feel inspires you, or probably just touching upon what we heard today, anything that stuck the head and is the highlight for you that you will be going back with. Probably Rasha can begin.
Yes, thank you, Kanika. I would say that something that inspires me, well, it's the youth activist Greta Thunberg, that she's a climate justice activist. I like very much what she does. She's making the young generation's voices heard, and she's a part of big platforms making our perspective be heard. I think it's really good what she does. And I would say, to close, it's really, really important to make, for youth people, our voices heard, and make us have available decent jobs, because our generation is facing a lot of challenges, more than our parents' generations. So that would be my closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rasha. Bikala, do you want to go next?
Okay, thank you. In order to ensure, in order to involve the youth in the development process, what I want to say is we don't need to provide or give the youth what they deserve, but we need to provide, we need to involve them in all aspects to resolve their problems, which means it's not about delivering or what they deserve, it's about involving them in the decision-making process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's excellent. Hannah?
Yeah, if I may add, one thing that inspires me, especially in Ethiopia, is feminist young people and feminist women's rights advocates who are really active in the works that they do and in engaging other people in conversations, which is something that I do not see in other youth groups in different countries. With feminist activists in Ethiopia, they're very open to start conversations and really open to changing their minds with regards to different things. So shout out to different women's rights activists in Ethiopia. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that's already happening, and we know from today, and we've known from literature and all the conversations, that investing in youth is a socioeconomic decision. It's a wise thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And it's important for everyone to be taking steps towards it. Thank you for everyone to join in. I thank you, the panelists, for, again, even preparing this in such a short notice. I know everyone's been pretty busy, but thanks for taking the time out. Thank you for all the attendees to attend the 1 hour session. And it's just to, again, highlight, this is a webinar, a Includovate thought series that's in 6 parts. 3 of it is already done. We've covered about things about social inclusion, about social inclusion governance, and today youth inclusion. And we have 3 more very exciting webinars lined up next week, which will be touching upon inclusive governance, inclusive behavior change, and how in the post-COVID world does development need to happen. So really excited, and do join in, do reach out to us on our social media handles, keep reposting, retweeting, and supporting the work that we do. Thank you so much for your time, and glad to be wrapping up on time. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.